I told my ex-wife's sister her dress looked beautiful, and she smiled and said, "You didn't mean the dress." I froze, because she was right, and we both knew it. Her name is Noelle, and for 3 years she was simply my wife's younger sister, the quiet one, the kind one, the one who set the table and prayed before dinner, while Victoria checked her phone. Was married to Victoria then. I had no business noticing Noelle at all. But God has a strange way of opening your eyes. Right after everything you thought you wanted has slipped through your fingers. The divorce wasn't loud, nobody cheated, nobody screamed. My marriage to Victoria simply starved quietly, politely, until the woman who once promised me forever signed the papers on a cold Tuesday in April and walked away without looking back. I thought that was the end of the Caldwell family for me. I thought I'd never sit at their table again. But then came her mother's 60th birthday, the garden party, that dress, and 4 words from Noelle that undid everything I'd spent a year carefully burying. So here's what I couldn't stop asking myself. How do you fall for the sister of the woman who left you and call it holy instead of shameful? What happens when your ex-wife finds out the truth? And when Noelle whispered that I didn't mean the dress? How long had she been waiting for me to notice her too? Let me take you back. Because to understand that garden, that dress, and those 4 words, you have to understand what it cost me to lose everything first. I was not a man who failed at things. That was who I decided to be at 9 years old. The night my father walked out of our small rental house in Columbus, Ohio, and never came back. My mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry for 11 years to keep our lights on. I watched her come home at 2 in the morning, smelling like industrial soap, and still pack my school lunch before she slept. I watched her cry exactly once, just once. The kitchen table late one Sunday, an unpaid electric bill in one hand, cold coffee in the other. The sound she made was small and private, and it broke something in me that never fully healed. I swore that night I'd never make a woman cry like that, and I swore I'd never become my father. So I became a man who won scholarships, debate trophies, Northwestern law. My first courtroom victory at 26 when my supervising partner clapped my shoulder and said, "Kid, you've got ice in your veins." I smiled and said thank you. I didn't tell him the ice scared me a little, because even then, even winning, there was a hollow thing in my chest I had no name for. It whispered in my apartment at midnight, in the silence after every success. On Sunday mornings when I drove past churches and heard singing drift out the open doors, and felt something I refused to look at directly, I ignored it. I was very good at ignoring things. I was 31 when Victoria Caldwell walked into my firm's charity gala and stopped the entire room without trying, tall, composed, a burgundy dress, and a smile she aimed like a strategy. Within 4 minutes, she'd worked the most important conversation in the room and won it. I thought, that is the most impressive person I have ever seen. I introduced myself 20 minutes later. She already knew my name. Caleb Ashford. She said, like she was reading a file, "The Donovan case, you were good." "You follow corporate litigation?" I asked. "I follow competence," she said. "It's rare enough to track." I laughed. She smiled and something in my chest tilted. I should have noticed even then that she was tracking my competence, not me, my wins, my usefulness. The version of me that photographed well. But I didn't notice. I was too busy being flattered. 14 months later, I met her family at a Sunday dinner in Evanston. Their house smelled like garlic bread and wood polish. Richard Caldwell shook my hand with a grip like a vice and watched me with quiet, patient eyes. Eleanor Caldwell hugged me before she'd even said hello. Like hugging strangers was simply how she greeted the world. And then a young woman came down the stairs carrying a casserole dish in both hands. Plain green sweater, jeans, hair tied back. Completely at ease in a way almost nobody is at a first meeting. "This is my little sister," Victoria said, the way you'd introduce background scenery. "Noelle." "Hi," Noelle said. And she smiled at me, not Victoria's aimed smile, but something open and unguarded, like a window left unlocked on purpose. "We're really glad you came. Mom's been cooking since yesterday. Please eat a lot or she'll be heartbroken." I laughed. Eleanor laughed louder. Victoria steered the conversation somewhere more important, and I filed Noelle Caldwell away in my mind under kind sister, and never looked again. I didn't know I was supposed to. I didn't know that 5 years later, that quiet woman with the casserole dish would be the one to finally crack me open. I married Victoria on a Saturday in June. The wedding was flawless. 212 guests, Edison lights, exposed brick. Victoria had angled the ceremony chairs herself to catch the best light for photographs. I stood at the altar and watched her walk toward me, and I loved her. I need you to believe that. I loved Victoria with everything I had. The problem was who she was marrying. She was marrying Caleb Ashford, senior partner. Future named on the door Caleb Ashford, the man who proved she'd chosen correctly. She was not prepared for the Caleb who'd come home with sawdust in his hair from volunteering at a habitat build, or the Caleb who started reading on Sunday mornings, history, philosophy, and once quietly, a Bible from a used bookstore that I told myself was just curiosity. "You've been different lately," she said one night, 18 months in, removing her earrings at her vanity. She said it like a weather report, mild front, moving through, slightly inconvenient. Different how? Quieter, less driven. "I'm plenty driven," I said. "I just don't want to talk about billing hours at every dinner." She met my eyes in the mirror. "Those dinners are our network, Caleb. Our network is our future." "What future?" I asked, and I wasn't attacking her. I genuinely wanted to know. A bigger apartment? Another vacation? Another night performing for people who are performing back at us? She didn't answer. She went to bed. That was how we fought. Not with fire. With silence, with absences where conversations should have been. We were two good people who had fallen in love with the idea of each other. And slowly, quietly, discovered the idea and the reality had walked off in different directions. Noelle visited us twice during the marriage, and both times, something happened that I didn't let myself examine. The second time, Christmas, I couldn't sleep, and at 6 in the morning I found her curled in the corner of our couch, with a blanket and a small worn Bible, the gray dawn light falling across the page. She didn't snap the book shut when I walked in. She just looked up and smiled. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I made coffee. She kept reading, and then we talked about Columbus, where she'd done 2 years of mission work, about my mother, about a documentary on dying coral reefs that had genuinely broken her heart. It was the most honest conversation I'd had in months, and it was with the wrong sister. I felt that thought arrive, clearly, fully formed, and I pushed it down so fast and so hard that I almost convinced myself I hadn't thought it. Almost. I went back to bed before Victoria woke up. I told myself it meant nothing. I was lying. I just didn't know it yet. The divorce came 14 months after that Christmas. Victoria got a partnership offer in New York. The opportunity of a lifetime, the one she'd been building towards since she was 22. "Come with me," she said. But it wasn't really an invitation. It was a test, because by then I'd already done the unthinkable. I'd left the firm, walked away from the partner track, the named door, the ice-in-the-veins identity I'd spent my whole life building, and opened a small legal aid office in Sin, working for families who couldn't afford to be helped. It was the first work I'd ever done that didn't feel hollow when the lights went off at night. "My nonprofit is here," I said. "Your nonprofit," she repeated. And in those two words, in the tiny, almost invisible thread of dismissal woven through them, I heard the entire obituary of my marriage. We tried. 6 weeks of real painful effort, a counselor with kind eyes and tissue boxes on every surface, long phone calls where we said true things and didn't know what to do with them. On a cold Tuesday in April, we signed the papers, and Victoria shook my hand. She shook my hand, like I was a deal that had closed. That handshake was the loneliest moment of my entire life. I sat in my car in the courthouse garage for 47 minutes, staring at a concrete wall. Then I drove to my new apartment, 1 bedroom, 1 window facing brick, a radiator that clanked every 40 minutes all night, and I sat on the bare living room floor, because I hadn't bought furniture yet, and I put my face in my hands. I didn't pray, I didn't know how, but something in me cracked open like dry ground, and out of that crack came a feeling so old it took me a moment to recognize it. It was the feeling I'd had at 9 years old, in the hallway, in my socks, watching my mother break at the kitchen table, helpless, unmoored, desperate for something solid to hold. I sat on that floor until midnight. Then I got up, opened my laptop, and typed 5 words I never thought I'd type. Churches near Logan Square, Chicago. I couldn't have explained it to anyone. I just knew the hollow thing in my chest had finally grown bigger than my willpower could fill. And I was so tired of trying to fill it alone. I found Cornerstone Community Church, Wednesday night, open to all. I bookmarked it. I had no idea I was bookmarking the night that would change my entire life. I didn't go the first Wednesday, or the second, but the third Wednesday, when the spring rain came so hard it sounded like applause on my one window. I drove to West Armitage and sat in my car for 11 minutes before I made myself walk in. The room was small, 40 folding chairs in a rough circle. The smell of coffee brewed too long ago. About 30 people, from kids in their 20s to a woman past 80, knitting something lavender in the corner. A man with gray temples stood at the front, holding a mug that read World's Okiest Fisherman. First time, he said, with zero judgment and a whole lot of welcome. That obvious? You're in the doorway in a wet jacket, holding your keys like you might still run. He grinned. Pastor Marcus Webb, grab a coffee. Sit anywhere. We're just people. Nobody's going to ask you anything you don't want to answer. I sat in the back row, and I listened, and Marcus Webb taught the book of John in a way I had never heard scripture taught in my life. Not as rules, not as a lecture, not as performance, but as a conversation with a living God who, he said, was personally interested in every broken person in that circle of folding chairs. He talked about grace like a man describing something he had personally received, like someone who had been on the floor once, the actual floor, and been lifted up by hands he couldn't see but could absolutely feel. I drove home in the rain, and in my car outside my building, I looked up at the streetlight shattering through the raindrops on my windshield, and I said out loud, barely a whisper, to the empty car, I don't know if you're there, but if you are, I'm here. It was the most honest thing I'd said in a year. I went back the next Wednesday, and the one after that, and on the 7th Wednesday, I looked across that circle of folding chairs, and my heart stopped. Because sitting directly across from me, with a worn Bible open on her knee and a paper cup of coffee in her hand, was Noelle Caldwell. She hadn't seen me yet. I had maybe 4 seconds to decide. Stay, and let her look up and see her ex-brother-in-law sitting across the room, or leave, and run back into the rain like a coward. I'd already had my coffee. I stayed. She looked up 2 minutes later, the exact second Marcus paused to find a verse, and the room went quiet. Her eyes drifted around the circle, the way eyes do in a silent room, and then they landed on me and stopped. I've watched it move across her face in real time, the flicker of shock, the widening eyes, the question forming. And then, and this is the part I didn't expect, her expression settled into something soft, something that, if I was reading it right, looked like relief. She gave me a small nod, I gave one back, and Marcus kept teaching, completely unaware that 2 people in his circle had just had their entire futures quietly rearranged. Afterward, in the shuffle of coats and goodbyes, she came straight to me. Caleb. Noelle. We stood in that specific awkwardness of 2 people who share a complicated history and are silently negotiating whether to name it or walk around. She named it. How long have you been coming here? 7 weeks. Something shifted in her face. I've been coming for 2 years, she said quietly. I can't believe we never. She stopped. I suppose you weren't before. No, I said, I wasn't. She nodded. No judgment, just understanding. How are you doing? She asked. And she asked it the way almost no one does. Not the polite version, but the real one. The one that actually leaves room for a true answer. Honestly, I said, if you want, better than I was. Coming here, it's helping, she smiled. The same quiet, warm smile from that Christmas morning years ago. Good, she said. It helped me too. Different season, same God. What season was yours? She tilted her head. I'll tell you sometime if we keep running into each other. We go to the same church, I said. 7 weeks and I had no idea. Seems like we might. Seems like, she agreed. And she pulled on a dark green coat 2 sizes too big, the kind you buy for warmth, not for looks, and walked out into the rain. I stood there longer than I should have. Marcus appeared beside me, drying a coffee mug with a dish towel. You know Noelle? He asked, casual as anything. She's my ex-wife's sister, I said. Marcus didn't even blink. He just nodded slowly, the way he did when he was thinking 3 things and saying none of them. Life's funny, he said. Or God is. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. And he walked off to stack chairs. I drove home with that sentence echoing in my chest the entire way. We kept running into each other, exactly like she'd said. The next Wednesday we sat 1 seat apart, close enough that when Marcus said something that hit us both, we'd glance at each other in the same half-second. And I started to notice how much those tiny shared moments add up, how they accumulate quietly when you're not watching. We started getting coffee after at a place called Maplewood Roasters where the barista wrote little notes on the cups in. Marker, you're doing great. Today is good. Once, mysteriously, the fog will lift. Noelle found this absolutely delightful. I found it charming for exactly one reason, because she found it delightful. She told me about her work. She was a social worker in Wicker Park, underpaid, overwhelmed, heartbroken on a regular basis, and in love with it, in a way that came through in every word. I told her about the eviction I'd just stopped, the juvenile record I was clearing for a kid before it could follow him 20 years. That's why you left the firm, she said. Not a question, a conclusion she'd already reached. Yes, she looked at me steadily. Victoria never told me that part. I didn't know what to do with that, so I let it sit. Does she know you come here? Noelle asked. We don't really talk. She's in New York. I know, Noelle said. I talk to her. Every week. The words landed between us like a dropped glass. I know that's complicated, she said, and she held my eyes when she said it. Not apologizing, not dodging, just being honest about the terrain instead of pretending it was flat. She's my sister. I love her. That doesn't go away. It shouldn't, I said. But you and me being friends, she said carefully. That can be its own thing if we're both careful. And she stuck out her hand. I looked at it for half a second, then I shook it. We were both smiling by the end. That embarrassed, helpless smile you get when you've just done something slightly ridiculous and completely sincere. At the same time, I had no idea, shaking her hand in that coffee shop, that careful would turn out to be the hardest promise I'd ever try to keep. Spring became summer, and I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Solid ground under my feet. Not the achievement ground I'd lived on my whole life, the kind that crumbles the second you stop performing. Something deeper, a foundation. I read scripture every morning now. John, then Romans, then the Psalms, which absolutely wrecked me. One Tuesday I read Psalm 34:18 over my first cup of coffee. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I had to set the cup down, because it wasn't written to the winners, not to the composed, the driven, the men with ice in their veins. It was written to the man on the bare floor of an empty apartment at midnight, who didn't know how to pray but whispered, "I'm here anyway." It was written to me. I told Marcus about it that week. He nodded slowly. That's the thing about the Psalms, he said. David wrote them from the floor. Real tears, real mistakes. The miracle isn't that he always got back up. It's that he stayed honest about being down. God doesn't need your performance, Caleb. He just needs your honesty. I thought about Victoria's aimed smile. I thought about myself at 26, proud of being cold. I thought about my father and the lifetime of energy I'd spent refusing to become him. And I thought for the first time about what it might feel like to simply be seen. Not performed seen, I wasn't there yet, but for the first time in my life I could see the road. Then, in early August, a cream envelope showed up in my mailbox. Addressed in old-fashioned cursive I recognized instantly. You are warmly invited to celebrate the 60th birthday of Eleanor Rose Caldwell. Saturday, August 24th. The Caldwell home, Evanston. Garden party. And underneath in blue ink in Eleanor's own hand, Caleb, I know this is unusual, but you have always been family to us. No obligation, but we'd love to have you, Eleanor. I stood at my mailbox for a long time. Going back to that house meant walking back into the life I'd lost. The garden where I'd been Victoria's husband. The people who'd known me in a configuration that didn't exist anymore. But it also meant Eleanor's hug, Richard's handshake, the garlic bread, the warmth of a home that had once briefly felt like mine. And it meant Noelle would be there. I told myself that last part didn't factor in. I was lying again. I was getting better at catching myself do it, but not fast enough. I responded yes. Then I texted Noelle. Your mom invited me to her birthday. I said yes. Hope that's okay. 3 minutes passed. She told me she was going to. I said it's her party. Her choice. Then, a few seconds later. I'm glad you said yes. She'll be so happy. I read it twice. I'm glad you said yes. I put the phone face down on the table. Careful, I told myself. Careful, but somewhere underneath the warning, a quieter voice was already asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. What if careful isn't going to be enough? August 24th came warm and golden, the kind of late summer day that knows it's borrowed time, and gives everything it has anyway. The Caldwell backyard was pure Eleanor. Wildflower centerpieces, string lights not yet lit waiting for dark. A long table loaded with real food, brisket, roasted vegetables, 3 kinds of pie. A birthday cake baked by the neighbor, who apparently treated baking as a form of prayer. Eleanor spotted me the second I came through the gate and crossed the whole garden with her arms already open. You came, she said, holding both my hands. Of course. Happy birthday, Eleanor. 60, she said, shaking her head somewhere between disbelief and delight. Come. Richard's by the food arguing about brisket with my brother. You can be the tiebreaker. For 40 minutes I was folded into the warm chaos of the party. Richard's handshake, the brisket debate, a neighbor named Harriet, who was 81, and had known Eleanor since their 20s and told stories that were equal parts hilarious and devastating. I was laughing at one of them when the air around me shifted, and I looked up. Noelle had just walked through the garden gate, and she was wearing a dress I had seen her in sweaters, in jeans, in that oversized green coat. I had never seen her in a dress. It was the color of the sky just after sunset, that deep, specific blue that isn't quite navy and isn't quite anything else, simple, unhurried. It moved softly when she walked. Her hair was down. She carried a gift bag in one hand and her cardigan over her arm, scanning the crowd for her mother. She hadn't seen me yet. Beside me, Harriet stopped mid-sentence, followed my gaze across the garden, then looked back at me with 81 years of pattern recognition in her eyes. "That's Eleanor's younger girl," she said. "Yes," I said. "Pretty." Harriet said. "Yes," I said, because lying would have been ridiculous. Harriet looked at me one beat longer. That look old people give you when they've seen everything and don't need to say any of it, then smiled to herself and went back to her story. Noelle found her mother. They hugged the way people hug when there's nothing to perform. Eleanor held her daughter's face and said something that made her laugh. Then Noelle turned, scanned the garden, and found me. She raised her hand in a small wave, and I started walking toward her. We met by the wildflowers and said hi, and both silently acknowledged the strangeness of standing here together, in the garden of the life I used to have, surrounded by people who'd known us as something we weren't anymore. "You okay?" she asked, quiet, just for me. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "Your mom's energy is unreal." Noelle's whole face softened with a love so simple it was almost holy. She prayed for this party every day, she said. Not just the party, what it would mean. She told me she woke up on her birthday and said thank you before she even opened her eyes. "That's faith," I said. "That's Mom," she said, and I looked at her. And the afternoon light was doing something completely unfair, and the careful thing and the honest thing had quietly split off in different directions. And my mouth made a decision a half-second before my brain could stop it. "That dress looks beautiful on you," I said. The words landed in the space between us, and Noelle went still. Not startled, not uncomfortable. Still. The way you go still when something you've been quietly waiting a long time for finally arrives, and you need 1 second to be sure it's real. Then she smiled, slow, honest, completely unguarded. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere true and has no interest in hiding. She held my eyes, and in hers there was softness and certainty, and something almost like a dare, all living in the same place at once. And she said, calm, quiet, sure, "You didn't mean the dress." And I froze, because she was right, completely, precisely, devastatingly right. I stood in Eleanor Caldwell's garden with 20 years of prepared responses at my disposal, every courtroom instinct, every ice-in-the-veins deflection, and I had absolutely nothing. The whole performance playbook was gone. Just the truth, sitting there in the open between us, finally done waiting. She didn't push, didn't fill the silence. She just held my eyes, steady, quiet, asking nothing, and let the moment be exactly what it was. I opened my mouth, closed it, and then, because there was nothing left in me but the truth. "No," I said quietly, "I didn't." She drew a slow breath, controlled, but not entirely steady, and in that tiny unsteadiness, I saw something that reached straight into my chest and rearranged it. "Caleb," she said. "I know." "Victoria." "I know," I said again. She pressed her lips together. "I've never let myself," she said carefully. "I need you to know that." "I know that too. So what do we do?" Not quite a question, not quite a statement. The kind of sentence that just hangs in the air and waits for you to be brave enough to answer it. I looked at her a long moment. "We do what we've been doing," I said slowly. "We stay careful, we stay honest. We talk to God about it before we talk to each other." I paused, and at some point, we talked to Victoria. Something behind her eyes, something held very, very carefully, shifted. "That's a hard conversation," she said. "Yes, you're not afraid of hard conversations." "I'm terrified of them," I said, "but I'm more terrified of living a lie. I've done that, it doesn't work." She went quiet, then slowly she nodded. Not yes to a destination, just yes to the road. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," I said. And from across the garden, Eleanor's voice rang out, "Noelle, come taste this cake before Carl eats the whole thing." Noelle's face broke into a smile, half for her mother, half pure relief at having somewhere to be. She looked at me once more, just a glance, but with something in it I felt all the way through. Then she turned toward her mother's voice, and right then, all at once, someone threw the switch and the string lights blazed on across the entire garden, warm gold everywhere, and Eleanor Caldwell laughed somewhere in the middle of it, a sound like a whole life lived gratefully, all at once. I bowed my head, just for a second. I don't know how to do this right, I prayed. I don't know what's allowed and what comes next, or whether this is your hand or just my own loneliness making shapes in the dark. But I don't want to do it without you. Whatever this is, I want you in it from the very beginning. I lifted my head. Noelle stood beside her mother, holding the cake knife steady, laughing. The lights caught the gold in the evening air. The whole garden smelled like summer and brisket and wildflowers. And for the first time in longer than I could measure, I knew exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because anything was resolved, not because anything was simple, but because, for once in my life, I wasn't performing. I was just there, and there I was beginning to understand was exactly where God had been waiting for me all along. But peace like that never lasts long, because 3 days later, my phone rang, and the name on the screen was the one name I wasn't ready to see. Victoria. 3 days after the garden party, my phone rang, and the name on the screen stopped my heart. Victoria. I stood in the middle of my apartment, holding the phone, watching it buzz in my hand. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the divorce was final. The last words she'd said to me in person had been, "Take care of yourself." Caleb, said the way you'd say it to a colleague you didn't expect to see again. So why was she calling now? A dozen possibilities ran through my mind. In 2 seconds she knew. Noelle had told her. Someone at the garden party had seen the way I looked at her sister and made a phone call. The whole fragile, careful thing I'd been trying to do right had already collapsed before it had even begun. My thumb hovered over the screen. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart," I told myself. "Lean not on your own understanding," I answered. Victoria. Caleb. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, precise, warm at the edges, guarded underneath. "Is this a bad time?" "No," I said. "It's fine. How are you?" A pause. That's kind of why I'm calling." I waited. "My mother told me you came to her birthday," she said, and there it was. I closed my eyes, braced for it. "That was kind of you," she said. I opened my eyes. "That was not what I'd expected." "She loved that you came," Victoria went on. "She told me 3 separate times. I think it meant more to her than the actual cake. And you know how my mother feels about cake." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and a short, surprised laugh came with it. "I do remember that, yeah. Anyway." Her voice shifted, and I could hear her doing the thing she always did before saying something real. That little recalibration, like a diver checking her footing on the edge of the board. "I called because I wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago. And I never did, because I was always better at strategy than at honesty." I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch. "Okay," I said. "I'm sorry, Caleb." The words came out steady, but there was something underneath them I'd almost never heard from her in 3 years of marriage. Vulnerability. "I'm sorry for who I was when we were married," she said. New York's been good for my career and absolutely brutal for my soul, and I've had a lot of long nights to think about things. And I keep landing on the same realization. I married you because you were impressive, not because I knew you. I don't think I ever really tried to know you. I think I was too busy curating a life to actually live one." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "You changed," she said, "near the end. You got quieter and softer, and you started caring about things that didn't impress anyone. And instead of being curious about it, instead of asking who you were becoming, I treated it like a problem. Like you were malfunctioning." She paused. "You weren't malfunctioning, Caleb. You were waking up, and I was too asleep to come with you." I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes, because here was the thing I had not been prepared for. I had spent 3 days bracing to confess to Victoria, to be honest with her about Noelle, to do the hard, right, courageous thing. And before I could say a single word, she had called to apologize to me. God has a sense of timing that I will never fully understand. "Victoria," I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "Thank you. That means more than you know." "I'm not finished," she said. "There's one more thing." I waited. "I've started going to church," she said. "Out here. There's a little congregation near my apartment, and I walked past it for about 4 months telling myself I was too busy, and then one Sunday I just went in, and I've been going ever since." Small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I don't know what I'm doing, honestly. I'm terrible at it. But there's something there I've been missing my whole life, and I'm too stubborn to pretend I'm not looking for it." I sat very still, because I had walked into Cornerstone for the first time 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized, broken open, desperate, whispering I'm here to the inside of my car in the rain. And somewhere 1,000 miles away, at almost the exact same time, the woman who left me had been walking past a little church 4 times a week, telling herself she was too busy. We had both been crushed in spirit, and the Lord had been close to both of us at the same time in 2 different cities, neither of us knowing the other was on the floor. "Victoria," I said carefully, "I need to tell you something too, because you just did a hard, honest thing and you deserve the same from me." "Okay," she said. and my heart started to pound. This was it. This was the conversation I'd been bracing for, the truth I owed her, the truth that could detonate everything, Lord. Give me the words, and give her the grace to receive them. I've been going to church too, I said, since right after the divorce. A place in Logan Square called Cornerstone. It's the thing that's been putting me back together. Caleb. Her voice was warm with something like wonder. I'm so glad. I'm genuinely glad. There's more, I said. The pause stretched. Noelle goes theirs too, I said. Silence, a long one. I closed my eyes and kept going. Because once you step off the board, you don't get to climb back up. I didn't know, I said. I'd been going for 7 weeks before I saw her there one Wednesday. We started talking. We're friends, Victoria, real friends. And I need to be honest with you, because you're her sister and you are my wife. And you deserve to hear this from me and not from anyone else. My hands were shaking. I have feelings for her, I said. I haven't acted on them. Nothing has happened. We agreed to be careful, and we have been, and I told her the first thing I needed to do, before anything moved 1 inch further, was talk to you. So I'm talking to you, because you matter, and she matters, and doing this right matters more to me than doing it easily. And then I stopped, and I waited for the explosion, for the cold, for the click of a phone hanging up, for the sound of the last bridge to the Caldwell family burning to the ground. The silence went on so long I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. It hadn't. Victoria? I said quietly, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick. You have no idea, she said, how long Noelle has carried a torch for you. I sat bolt upright. What? I said. Oh, Caleb. And she laughed, but it was a wet, the kind that's halfway to tears. You really didn't know. You never knew. How are you so smart and so completely blind at the same time? Victoria, what are you? 3 years, she said. She's loved you for 3 years. Since that first Sunday dinner. The casserole dish, remember? She came down those stairs and saw you, and I watched my little sister's whole face change, and she spent the next 3 years burying it so deep she wouldn't even admit it to herself, because you were mine, because she loved me, because she would rather have died than do a single thing to hurt me or our marriage. My mouth had gone completely dry. She used to pray for you, Victoria said. Did you know that, when we were married? She told me once, years ago, that she prayed for you every single day. I don't know what I thought she meant. I was too self-absorbed to wonder. But I know now. She was praying for the husband of the sister she loved, while quietly breaking her own heart over him, and never said one word. For 3 years. I stood up, sat down, stood up again. I treated her like background scenery, I whispered. I introduced her like she was furniture. You did, Victoria said gently. And she let you, because it was safer that way. I didn't know what to say. There were no words anywhere in me. Caleb, Victoria said, listen to me. I need to say this clearly, because I know you, and I know you'll spend weeks tying yourself in knots over it if I don't. I waited. I am not going to be the reason my sister doesn't get to be happy, she said. I had you, and I had 3 years, and I didn't know what to do with them because I didn't know who I was. Noelle has known exactly who she is her whole life. She's the best person in our entire family. She's the best person I know, and if God has somehow, through all of this, through the divorce in the church and 1,000 things neither of us planned, put the two of you in the same room twice a week, then who am I to stand in the middle of that? I'm giving you my blessing, she said. Both of you. Do you hear me? I'm giving it freely and I mean it, but I'm going to ask you for one thing in return. Anything, I said. Don't you dare do to her what you and I did to each other, she said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle. Don't perform. Don't curate. Don't love the idea of her. Know her. Actually know her. She deserves to be known, Caleb. She deserves it more than anyone I've ever met. I was crying now. I didn't even try to hide it. There was no one to hide it from. I promise, I said. I promise you, Victoria. Good, she said. And then, softer. And Caleb? Thank you for telling me yourself. That's the man I should have known I was married to. I'm glad I finally got to meet him, even if it's 3 years too late. We talked a little longer about her church, about my work, about Eleanor's birthday cake. And when we finally said goodbye, it was the warmest conversation we had ever had. Warmer than anything in 3 years of marriage, because for the first time neither of us was performing. We were just 2 broken people who'd been found by the same God, telling each other the truth. I hung up, and I sat on my couch in the quiet, and I put my face in my hands, and I wept. But not the way I'd wept on the floor of this apartment 8 months ago. This time the tears were something else entirely. This time they were gratitude. I didn't call Noelle right away. I wanted to. My whole body wanted to. 3 years. She's loved you for 3 years. The words kept ringing through me like a struck bell. And every time they rang, I felt this enormous, overwhelming urge to drive straight to Wicker Park and stand outside her building and tell her I knew. I finally knew, and I was sorry it had taken me so long. But I didn't, because I'd promised Victoria I wouldn't perform. And showing up in a grand romantic gesture before I'd even prayed about it, before I'd sat with it, before I'd let God do whatever he was doing, that would have been a performance, a beautiful one. But a performance, so instead, I did something harder. I waited. I went to my office. I sat with my clients. I won the eviction case, fully and finally. And the young couple cried in my conference room, and the husband hugged me so hard, he lifted me off the ground, and I thought, this is the work that matters. This is the man I'm becoming. I called my mother in Columbus. And this time, I told her about Noel, all of it, the garden, the dress, the 4 words, Victoria's phone call, the 3 years. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Caleb, baby, do you remember what you swore to me when you were 9? "Which part?" I said. "I swore a lot of things when I was 9. "You swore you'd never make a woman cry the way I cried that night," she said, "at the kitchen table. I remember. This girl," my mother said, "this Noelle, she's been crying quiet tears over you for 3 years. Tears you didn't even know about." She paused. "You can't go back and undo that, but you can spend the rest of your life making sure every tear she cries from here on out is a good one." I had to sit down. "That's the difference between you and your father," my mother said. "He left because staying was hard. You're learning to stay because it's hard. That's the whole thing, baby. That's the whole entire thing." I drove to Cornerstone that night, barely able to see the road. It was a Wednesday, and I had decided something on the drive over. Something I'd been moving toward for 8 months without fully admitting it. I'd been coming to Cornerstone since April. I'd read John and Romans and the Psalms. I'd prayed in my car and at my kitchen table, and in the quiet of 1,000 ordinary moments. I'd felt the hollow thing in my chest filled by degrees, week by week, with something solid and warm and real. But I had never said it out loud. I had never made it official in front of people, the way you make a vow official, speaking it where witnesses can hear. And I was tired of being a man who felt things privately and never said them. That was the man who'd lost his marriage. The man who noticed Noel on a Christmas morning and buried it. The man who'd whispered "I'm here" to the inside of his own car where no one could hear. I didn't want to be that man anymore. When Marcus opened the floor at the end of the study, the way he always did, asking if anyone had anything on their heart, I raised my hand. Marcus looked at me. Something in his face went very still and very glad at the same time. "Caleb," he said. I stood up, 30-some folding chairs. Gerald with his thermos. Priya the pediatric nurse. The woman past 80 who was always knitting, who had set her lavender yarn down in her lap and was looking at me with bright, expectant eyes, and one empty chair where Noelle usually sat, because she wasn't there that night. I didn't know why. I'd half hoped, half dreaded she would be. But the chair was empty, and a small part of me was almost relieved, because what I was about to say, I needed to say for God and for myself, not as a performance for the woman I was falling for. "I'm not good at this," I said. My voice wasn't steady. I let it not be steady. I've spent my whole life being good at things, and this is the one thing I've never been good at. Just saying what's true, out loud, in front of people, without managing how it lands. A few quiet nods around the circle. "I came here 8 months ago," I said, "because my marriage had ended, and I was sitting on the floor of an empty apartment, and I had finally run out of ways to hold myself together. I didn't believe in anything. I'd built my whole life on being impressive, and being impressive had gotten me a beautiful, lonely, empty life that fell apart the first time it was really tested." I looked at Marcus. "You taught John that first night," I said. "And you said God was personally interested in every broken person in this room, and I thought that was a nice thing pastors say." I didn't believe it. My throat tightened. "I believe it now." The room had gone completely silent. "I've spent 8 months reading and praying and showing up," I said. "And somewhere in there, without me even noticing the exact moment it happened, I stopped doing it out of desperation and started doing it out of love. I love a God I used to be too proud to even look at. And I've been feeling it for weeks, and I've never said it out loud, and I'm done being a man who feels things and never says them." I took a breath. "So I'm saying it. Tonight. In front of all of you. So it's real, and so I can't take it back." My voice broke, and I let it break. "Jesus is my Lord. I'm His, whatever that costs me, whatever that means, however badly I do it. I'm His. I'm not on the floor of that apartment anymore. I got picked up, and I know now who picked me up. I don't fully remember what happened next. I remember Gerald standing, 77 years old, 2 bankruptcies, 1 heart attack. Standing up out of his chair with tears running into the creases of his face and crossing the circle, and wrapping me in a hug that smelled like coffee from his thermos. I remember Priya laughing and crying at the same time. I remember the woman with the lavender yarn pressing both her hands over her heart. I remember Marcus, standing at the front, not saying a word, just looking at me with the expression of a man watching something he had prayed for and never been sure he'd see. And I remember thinking, in the middle of all of it, Noelle should be here. I wanted her to see it, not because I needed her to, but because I wanted to share it with her. This moment, this turning, this becoming. I wanted her to know that the man who told her I want God in it from the very beginning had meant every single word. But she wasn't there. And I didn't know why, and when I checked my phone in the parking lot afterward, there was a text from her that had come in 2 hours earlier. While I was inside, becoming someone new, it said, "Caleb, I think we made a mistake. I need some space. Please don't call me tonight." I stood in the Cornerstone parking lot under the streetlights and read it 4 times. I think we made a mistake. The high I'd been riding, the joy, the tears, the hug that smelled like Gerald's coffee, drained out of me all at once and left me cold. I need some space. My first instinct, the old instinct, the lawyer instinct, was to fix it. To call her immediately, to build the argument, to lay out the case for why we hadn't made a mistake, to manage the situation back into control. She'd asked me not to call, so I didn't. That might have been the single hardest thing I had ever done. Standing in that parking lot with my whole chest aching, holding a phone that could reach her in 3 seconds, and not calling her. Because she'd asked me not to. Because respecting her no was part of loving her, and I had just stood up in front of 30 people and said I was his, and being his meant I didn't get to override her boundary just because my heart hurt. I drove home. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and I prayed the most honest prayer of my new life. I don't understand. I did it right, I told Victoria. Victoria gave her blessing. I waited. I didn't perform. I came here tonight and I gave you everything out loud in front of everyone. So why does it feel like it's all falling apart in my hands? And in the dark, I didn't get an answer. I just got the smallest, quietest impression. Not words exactly, more like a hand on the shoulder. Trust me with the parts you can't see. I held on to that all night. She let me come over 2 days later. I texted her once, the morning after the parking lot. Just, "I'm not going to call. I'll wait as long as you need. Just know I'm here when you're ready. And Noelle, I respect your no. Completely." She didn't respond for 30 hours. Then on Friday evening, "Come over tomorrow morning, we should talk." I almost didn't sleep again. Her apartment in Wicker Park was small and warm and looked exactly like her. Books everywhere, a worn green couch, a little wooden cross on the wall by the window, plants on every surface that all looked extremely well cared for. She opened the door in a sweater and jeans, her hair tied back, no dress, no garden, no golden light. Just Noelle in the ordinary morning, looking like she hadn't slept much either. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. She made coffee. We sat on the green couch with a careful, deliberate space between us, and she told me the truth. "Victoria called me," she said. My stomach dropped. "After she called you," Noelle said. "She told me everything that you told her about us, that you feelings." She wrapped both hands around her mug, "And that she gave you her blessing, Noelle." "Let me finish," she said, not unkindly, "please. I've been rehearsing this for 2 days, and if I don't get it out now, I never will." I closed my mouth. When Victoria told me she'd given us her blessings, said, I should have felt happy. That was the thing standing between us, right? That was the whole reason I spent 3 years burying this so deep, I wouldn't even let myself dream about it. Because of Victoria, because of loyalty, because she's my sister and you were her husband, and I would have rather disappeared than be the kind of sister who wanted her sister's husband. Her voice was very steady, but her hands weren't. "So she takes that wall down," Noelle said. "She literally calls me and removes the only obstacle. And instead of feeling free, I panicked. Because as long as there was a wall, I never had to be brave. I got to love you from a safe distance and call it loyalty. I got to bury it and call it virtue." She looked up at me, and her eyes were bright. "But the wall's gone now, Caleb. And that's terrifying. Because now there's no excuse. Now I either have to actually do this, actually let myself be loved, actually risk it, actually be known by you, or I have to admit I was hiding behind my sister this whole time because I was a coward." "You are not a coward," I said. "I sent you that text," she said. "I think we made a mistake. That was the coward talking. That was 3 years of hiding. making one last grab for the safety of the wall. She shook her head. It wasn't a mistake, Caleb. The mistake was the text, I'm sorry. So sorry I sent it the same night that she stopped. The same night that what? I asked gently. She looked at me. Priya texted me, she said. Last night. She told me what you did Wednesday. At Cornerstone. She told me you stood up and gave your life to Christ in front of everyone. Her chin trembled. And I wasn't there. The one moment I prayed about for 3 years, the man I loved finding God, and I missed it, because I was hiding behind a wall that wasn't even there anymore. And then Noelle Caldwell, who had been steady through the whole speech, broke. The tears came all at once and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and 3 years of buried, silent, faithful love finally came up all at once and spilled over. I didn't reach for her, not yet. I wasn't going to grab, I'd promised Victoria. Instead I said the truest thing I had. Noelle, I knew you weren't there. And do you want to know what I thought? Standing up there in front of everyone, in the middle of the most important moment of my whole life, she looked at me, wet-eyed. I thought, Noelle should be here. I leaned forward slowly, just slightly, not because I needed you to witness it, but because it was the first thing in my whole life I'd ever done without performing, and you're the first person who ever made me want to stop performing. You did that. You and a worn-out Bible and a paper coffee cup and 3 years of praying for a man who was too blind to notice you were the answer to his own emptiness the entire time. She was crying harder now, but she was also, somewhere underneath it, beginning to smile. I'm not afraid of the wall coming down, I told her. I'm grateful for it. Because I don't want to love you from a safe distance, Noelle. I've done safe. Safe cost me everything. I want the terrifying thing. I want to actually know you, and I want you to actually let me. She wiped her face with both hands. That's the second time you've said it, she whispered. Said what? That you want to know me, she said. Victoria said the exact same thing. She told me she made you promise to know me. Not the idea of me. She did, I said. And I promised, and I meant it. Noelle laughed, a wet, broken, beautiful laugh, and shook her head. My sister, she said, is a better person than either of us ever gave her credit for. Yeah, I said softly. She is. We sat there a moment in the warm little apartment, with the wooden cross on the wall and the coffee going cold. So, I said, no more wall. No more wall, she agreed, and no more hiding. She took a deep breath. No more hiding. Then can I ask you something I should have asked at the garden party, I said. If I hadn't been so busy being a coward myself. She nodded. Noelle Caldwell, I said, would you let me take you out? Properly, honestly. In the light. As the man I actually am. Broken and rebuilt and completely, terrifyingly serious about you. And she smiled, that slow, honest, unguarded smile. The one from the garden, the one that came from somewhere true. You really didn't mean the dress, she said. No, I said, I never did. Yes, she said. Yes, Caleb, take me out. And the morning light came through her window and caught the little wooden cross, and threw a thin gold line across the floor between us. For the first time in 3 years, neither of us was on the other side of a wall. But I should have known. Because in my experience, the moment people finally tear down the one wall between them is exactly the moment life decides to test whether the foundation underneath can hold, and the test was already coming. It arrived 11 days later in a phone call at 4:47 in the morning, about Eleanor. The phone rang at 4:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I have never been able to forget it. I came up out of sleep the way you do when a phone rings in the dark before dawn, instantly, completely, with your heart already pounding before your mind has caught up. Nobody calls at 4:47 in the morning with good news. Everybody knows that. Your body knows it before you do. The screen said Noelle. I answered before the second ring. Noelle, and I heard her crying. Not the soft tears from her couch 11 days earlier. This was different. This was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere underneath words, the kind that can't quite organize itself into sentences. It's my mom, she got out. Caleb, it's my mom. She had a stroke. Dad found her on the kitchen floor and we're at Northwestern Memorial, and they took her and they won't tell us anything yet, and I'm coming, I said. I was already out of bed, already pulling on the first clothes my hands found. I'm already coming. Don't move. I'm getting in the car right now. Keep talking to me, okay? Stay on the phone. Okay, she whispered. I drove to the hospital in the dark. Phone propped on the dash, listening to her breathe and cry and try to hold herself together, and I prayed the whole way. Out loud in the car, the way I'd whispered I'm here to the rain 8 months ago, except this time I wasn't asking if he was there. This time I knew. Be close to her. Be close to Richard. Be close to Eleanor. wherever she is right now, on whatever edge she's on. You are the God who is close to the broken-hearted. So be close, be close, be close. I ran into that emergency room at 5:20 in the morning, and I found Noelle in a hard plastic chair beside her father. And she stood up the second she saw me, and she walked straight into my arms and stayed there. It was the first time I had ever held her, and it wasn't romantic, and it wasn't the way I'd imagined it in the quiet, hopeful weeks since her couch. It was grief, pure grief, her face pressed into my shoulder and her whole body shaking. I want to tell you something I learned in that exact moment. Standing in a fluorescent-lit at dawn, this was better. Because this was real, this was known. This was being trusted with someone at the worst hour of their life. I had spent 3 years married to a woman who never once cried on my shoulder, because she never once let me see her break. And here was Noelle, breaking completely in front of me, because of me, because somewhere in the last few months she had decided I was safe. I held her up, that's all I did. For a long time. I just held her up. And I held Richard up too a little. That enormous, quiet man with the vice grip handshake, sitting in a plastic chair looking suddenly small and old lost. I put my hand on his shoulder and he reached up and gripped it with one of his huge hands and held on, and neither of us said a word, and we didn't need to. Eleanor survived the night. The doctor came out around 7 a.m. Young, exhausted, kind, and told us it had been an ischemic stroke, that they'd caught it inside the treatment window. That the next 72 hours would tell us a great deal, that there would likely be a long road of recovery and rehabilitation, but that she was alive and stable and fighting like someone half her age. Richard Caldwell put his face in his enormous hands and wept, and Noelle turned to me, and her face was wet and exhausted and so beautiful it broke something open in my chest, and she said, "You came, you came." "Of course I came," I said, at 4:47 in the morning. Before I even finished the sentence, "Noelle," I said, "there is no hour you could ever call me that I won't come." She looked at me for a long moment. "I called you first," she said quietly, like she was only just realizing it herself. "Before anyone, before my friends, before I called you. My hands your name was the one I needed." "Good," I said softly. "That's exactly right. That's how it's supposed to be." The next were hard. I'm not going to pretend they weren't. This is a love story, but I've learned that real love stories aren't the ones where nothing goes wrong. They're the ones where everything goes wrong, and the love holds anyway. Eleanor's recovery was slow and frightening, and full of small terrors and small victories. The right side of her body was weak. Her speech came back in pieces, a word at a time, and the first full sentence she managed. 3 days in a hospital bed, with a face that could only move on one side, was looking right at Noelle and then at me standing beside her. About time. And then she smiled her crooked-ass smile and closed her eyes, exhausted from the effort, completely satisfied with herself. Noelle and I just stared at each other. Because Eleanor, half paralyzed, 3 days out from a stroke that nearly killed her, barely able to form words, had used her first full sentence to comment on the fact that I was standing at her daughter's side, holding her daughter's hand. "She doesn't miss anything," Noelle whispered. "Even now, even like this, she doesn't miss anything." "She's your mother," I said. "Where do you think you got it?" Victoria flew in from New York that same week. I was there when she arrived, at the hospital, in the family waiting room, where I'd practically been living between work and visiting hours. I'd been bringing Richard real food because he kept forgetting to eat. I'd been driving Noelle home at night so she'd actually sleep. I'd been sitting with Eleanor during the morning hours when Noelle was at work, reading to her from the Psalms because the speech therapist said hearing language helped, and because the Psalms were the thing that had put me back together. And I wanted to give Eleanor something that had been given to me. I was sitting with Eleanor, reading her Psalm 23, when the door opened and Victoria walked in. We hadn't seen each other in person since the divorce. She stopped in the doorway. I stopped reading, and for a moment the whole weight of it just sat there in the room. The ex-husband, the ex-wife, the mother in the hospital bed between them. The sister who wasn't there but was the reason everything had changed. Then Victoria looked at the open Bible in my hands, and at her mother who had turned her head toward the sound of my voice, and something crossed her face. Something that wasn't jealousy and wasn't grief and wasn't anger. Something more like understanding. "You're reading to her," Victoria said. "The therapist said it helps," I said. "And the Psalms," I stopped. "They helped me. I wanted her to have them." Victoria crossed the room. She came and stood beside me, looking down at her mother, and Eleanor reached up with her good hand and Victoria took it. "Hi, Mom," Victoria said, and her voice cracked, and Eleanor, with her crooked half-smile, looked from her daughter to me and back to her daughter, and managed slowly, one word at a time, "My whole family." Victoria looked at me over her mother's bed. "And here is the moment I want you to see, because I will carry it the rest of my life." My ex-wife looked at me across her hospitalized mother, in the wreckage of everything that had broken between us, and she smiled. A real one. The kind she never once gave me in 3 years of marriage, because in 3 years of marriage she'd never been free enough to give it. "Keep reading," Victoria said quietly. "She likes your voice. She always did. She told me at the wedding you had a voice like a man who'd be good to come home to." She paused. I didn't listen. I was too busy with the seating chart. "Victoria, keep reading, Caleb," she said gently. "I'll sit. I want to hear it too." So I read the 23rd Psalm to Eleanor Caldwell in a hospital room, with my ex-wife on one side of the bed holding her mother's hand, and me on the other side holding the book. And somewhere in the middle of "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," Victoria Caldwell bowed her head and began very quietly to pray. And I understood in that moment what God had been doing the whole time. He hadn't been arranging a romance. He'd been redeeming an entire family. Eleanor came home in the autumn. She came home to a house full of ramps and railings I'd installed myself over 3 weekends. Me and Richard and Darnell, my paralegal, who turned out to be as good with a power drill as he was with procedural precedents, and who informed me cheerfully that he was billing me in brisket. She came home to a family that had been remade. Because here is what that terrible 447 phone call did. In the strange economy of God, where even the worst things get turned toward good, it pulled all of us back to the same table. Richard, who softened. Victoria, who flew back twice more and called every Sunday and was slowly becoming a sister Noelle could actually reach. And Noelle and me, forged in the fire of those hospital weeks, into something far stronger and far more real than anything that could have grown in easy soil. We had skipped right past the careful, tentative early dating. You can't be tentative with someone you've held up at 4:47 in the morning. By the time the leaves turned, Noelle and I weren't seeing how it goes. We were certain, the kind of certain that doesn't come from butterflies, the kind that comes from having watched each other at our absolute worst, exhausted, terrified, grieving, stripped of every performance and choosing each other anyway, daily. Marcus married us the following June. We were married at Cornerstone, not a magazine wedding, not 212 guests and Edison lights and ceremony chairs angled for the photographs. There were maybe 60 people in a converted fellowship hall with a drop ceiling and a linoleum floor, and it was the most beautiful room I have ever stood in. Gerald was there, in a suit that was at least 30 years old, weeping before the ceremony even started. Priya, the woman with the lavender yarn who had knitted us a blanket. My mother, Dana Ashford, in the front row in a blue dress, watching her son marry a woman who would only ever make her cry good tears, and crying plenty of them herself. Richard Caldwell walked Noelle down the aisle, slowly, with a cane in one hand and his daughter's arm in the other, both of them moving carefully, both of them beaming. And Eleanor sat in the front row, in a chair by the aisle, recovered enough to be there, to sit up tall, to watch with her crooked, radiant, hard-won smile. And Victoria was Noelle's maid of honor. I want you to sit with that. The woman who divorced me stood at the front of the church as the maid of honor for her sister's wedding, to me. And when she'd been asked, months earlier, she had said yes before Noelle even finished the question. And then she had cried, and then she had said, "It's the only way I'll ever get to be in this story the right way. Let me be in it the right way." Noelle came down the aisle in a dress, a simple one, the color of the sky just after sunset, deep, specific blue. The same blue from the garden she'd had it remade for the wedding. She didn't tell me until after. She just walked toward me in that impossible, remembered blue, and she watched my face find the memory, and she smiled the slow, honest, unguarded smile. And I did not freeze this time. This time I had every word ready. When it came time for the vows, I'd asked Marcus if I could say something first, not a written vow, just. He nodded. I turned to Noelle. The whole room went quiet, and I found looking at her that my hands were steady and my voice was steady, and there was no ice anywhere in me, none at all, just warmth, all the way down. "For most of my life," I said, "I thought love was something you earned by being impressive. So I spent 35 years being impressive. And I got a beautiful, lonely, empty life that fell apart the moment it was tested." I heard Victoria, off to the side make a soft sound. Then I lost everything, I said, and I ended up on the floor of an empty apartment, and from floor, for the first time in my life, I reached for God instead of for the next achievement, and He picked me up. And then, as I still don't fully understand how He does His arithmetic, He led me to a Wednesday night Bible study, where I looked across a circle of folding chairs and saw a woman I'd known for years and never once truly seen. Noelle's eyes filled. "You prayed for me for 3 years," I said, "when I was married to your sister, when I didn't deserve it and didn't notice you, and treated you like background scenery. You prayed for a man who was too blind to know he was already drowning, and then you waited, quietly, faithfully, without ever once trying to grab what wasn't yours to grab, until God finished the work of breaking me open and putting me back together right." The room was silent, even the air felt like it was holding its breath. "So here is my vow," I said. "I will not love the idea of you. I made that mistake once and it cost 2 good people 3 years. I will love the actual you. I will know you, on the good mornings and the 47 mornings both. I will come, every second you call at any hour for the rest of my life. And I will follow God first, because I learned the hard way that a man who tries to be a wife's whole world will crush them both, but a man who follows God can have something left over to give. I choose Him, and because I chose Him first, I get to choose you, freely, gratefully, with my whole heart for as long as He gives me breath." I took her hands. "You once told me I didn't mean the dress," I said. "You were right. I didn't mean the dress. I meant you. I have meant you from the moment I let myself stop performing long enough to actually look. And I will go on meaning you, Noelle, until the day I die." She was crying. The whole room was crying. Gerald was practically a fountain, and Noelle, through her tears, laughing, gripping my hands, said the only thing she needed to say. "It took you long enough," and the whole church broke. We were pronounced husband and wife in a converted fellowship hall with a drop ceiling and a linoleum floor. And as Marcus said the words, and the room rose up cheering, I looked out at it, at my weeping mother, at Richard on his feet with his cane raised in the air, at Eleanor with both hands pressed over her heart and tears running down her crooked, miraculous smile, at Gerald and Priya and the lavender yarn woman, at Victoria standing just behind Noelle, crying and clapping, and finally in the story the right way, and I thought about the floor of that empty apartment. I thought about the man who'd sat there at midnight, divorced and hollow and certain his life was over, and I wanted to reach back through time and tell him, "Hold on. Just hold on. You have no idea what's coming. You have no idea who's coming for you." The string lights came on, Noelle had insisted, the same warm gold from the garden, strung all across that humble little fellowship hall, and in the gold light I kissed my wife. And somewhere above us, I am certain, the God who is close to the broken-hearted, the God who finds men on the floors of empty apartments and women, hiding behind walls of their own loyalty, the God who redeems whole families through a terrible phone call at 4:47 in the morning, looked down on that little room full of broken, mended, grateful people, and smiled. So let me leave you with this. I spent 35 years believing I had to earn love by being impressive, and it nearly cost me everything. It took losing it all, the marriage, the career, the version of myself I'd spent a lifetime building, for me to finally be empty enough for God to fill me, and finally honest enough to be truly known. And the love I'd been chasing my whole life, it had been quietly praying for me from across the room the entire time. I just couldn't see it until I stopped performing long enough to look. So here is my question for you, the one I want you to carry with you tonight after you close this. What are you still trying to earn that God is just waiting to give you for free the moment you finally stop performing and let yourself be known? Think about it. And maybe, like a broken man on the floor of an empty apartment who had no idea his whole life was about to begin, maybe tonight is the night you finally say it out loud. I'm here. He's been waiting for you the whole time.